Welcome to Tech Blueprint, a window that lets you know the latest technology news in the world. When smartphones were just emerging, it was really lively. Major mobile phone manufacturers held mobile phone press conferences, one after another, and the scene was more lively than the Chinese New Year. At these press conferences, there is always something that is introduced in detail, that is, the brain in the mobile phone, the processor chip. At that time, when people mentioned processor chips, the first thing they thought of was Qualcomm Snapdragon. Why? Because at that time, Qualcomm Snapdragon chips were really popular, with strong performance and fast speed, and they were simply the stars in the mobile phone industry. In order to grab the first launch rights of Qualcomm Snapdragon chips, mobile phone manufacturers have tried their best, and some even spent a lot of money to compete. Qualcomm also made a lot of money and smiled from ear to ear. However, the good times did not last long. Just when Qualcomm Snapdragon was in its heyday, Huawei's Kirin chip suddenly emerged. This Kirin chip was amazing as soon as it came out, with powerful performance, directly overshadowing the glory of Qualcomm Snapdragon. At that time, everyone said that Huawei's Kirin chip was so powerful that even Qualcomm Snapdragon had to stand aside. Speaking of Qualcomm, everyone may know that it is a major supplier of mobile phone SoC processor chips in the world, mainly providing chips to major mobile phone manufacturers. Many of us have installed Qualcomm Snapdragon processor chips in our mobile phones. At that time, Qualcomm Snapdragon chips were the heart of our mobile phones. Without this heart, the mobile phone would not work. However, in addition to Qualcomm, there is another well-known mobile phone chip supplier, that is MediaTek in Taiwan, China. However, MediaTek mainly makes mid- and low-end chips, and the high-end chip market is still firmly occupied by Qualcomm Snapdragon. Although MediaTek's global chip shipments have now exceeded Qualcomm, Qualcomm still has a great advantage in the high-end chip market. After all, the research and development of high-end chips is not so easy, and it requires deep technical accumulation and a lot of capital investment. However, although Qualcomm's processor level is high, its reputation is not very good. You may have heard of the Qualcomm tax, right? This word is not just a casual remark, it has a real meaning. Qualcomm is not only a mobile phone chip supplier, but also holds a lot of communication patents. Especially in the 3G and 4G era, those key technologies CDMA are basically indispensable to mobile phone manufacturers. And Qualcomm charges high licensing fees based on these patents. You say Apple, they also have their own SoC processor A-series chips, but they still have to pay Qualcomm for communication patent licensing fees. That's not all, Qualcomm also added a layer of communication patent licensing fees when selling mobile phone-related chips. This double charge makes Apple very dissatisfied. Our domestic mobile phone manufacturers are also often complaining that mobile phones have meager profits, and a big reason is that most of the money is given to Qualcomm. You say Xiaomi mobile phones, Oppo mobile phones, Vivo mobile phones, and Huawei mobile phones back then, which one has not been exploited by Qualcomm? However, after entering the 5G era, the situation is different. Huawei has the largest number of 5G essential patents in the world. Now, Huawei can cross-license patents with Qualcomm and no longer have to pay Qualcomm. This is really great. Moreover, Huawei has also launched its own Kirin chip. After continuous improvement, the performance of this Kirin chip is comparable to that of Qualcomm Snapdragon and Apple A-series chips. Especially the Kirin 9000, which has surpassed and launched the world's first 5nm 5G SoC. This is really amazing. You said that the integrated 5G baseband chip, Qualcomm Snapdragon, was more than a year and a half late to come up with it. As for Apple, it has not yet achieved baseband integration. At that time, although Huawei mobile phones still purchased some Qualcomm Snapdragon chips, the flagship mobile phone cases all used Kirin chips. For mid- and low-end mobile phones, Snapdragon chips were used to make up the number. At that time, although the Kirin chip was only used by Huawei for its own use, its sales in the domestic market once exceeded Qualcomm. HiSilicon also rushed into the top 10 list of global semiconductors because of this. This is really awesome. But now, if you look at Huawei phones again, they have basically replaced Kirin chips. It is difficult to find Qualcomm Snapdragon. Why is this? In fact, there are two reasons. The first is that Huawei has achieved self-production of Kirin. In recent years, the United States has imposed multiple rounds of sanctions on Huawei. Not only does it restrict Qualcomm, Intel and other high-end chips such as 5G from being shipped to Huawei, but it also restricts TSMC, Samsung and other foundry Kirin chips. This really puts Huawei in a desperate situation. However, Huawei did not compromise. Instead, it strengthened its research and development efforts and quietly solved the problem. Finally, it took only more than 3 years to achieve independent production of self-developed Kirin. With the continuous improvement of production capacity, Huawei phones have been replaced with Kirin chips and no longer need Qualcomm chips. The second reason is that Qualcomm chip shipments are restricted. After the United States issued a chip ban, Qualcomm could no longer ship 5G Snapdragon chips to Huawei. This has caused Qualcomm to lose a lot of money. Every year, it has to lose $8 billion. In order to make more profits, Qualcomm acted quickly. They applied for the license to ship 4G and other chips. Then, they started selling high-priced 4G chips to Huawei. Not only that, they also bundled and sold low-end Snapdragon chips. Huawei, because of the chip shortage, in order to maintain its mobile phone business, can only purchase Qualcomm's 4G Snapdragon chips at a high price. But even so, the United States will not allow it. They have revised the chip rules and revoked Qualcomm and Intel's 4G chip shipping licenses. This time, Qualcomm is really pitted. However, the US ban this time is too late. Because Huawei has achieved self-production of Kirin. Originally, Huawei planned to continue purchasing Qualcomm's Snapdragon chips. Now that the United States still does not allow it, it has to replace it with Kirin chips. Qualcomm, you just bear the loss. In this regard, some foreign media directly commented, the chip situation has suddenly reversed. Qualcomm has completely become a thing of the past for Huawei. Even if the United States does not expand restrictions, Huawei does not need Qualcomm chips. After all, Kirin chips and Hongmeng system are a perfect match. Now, Huawei phones have their own Kirin chips and Hongmeng system. These two things are the heart and soul of Huawei phones. With them, Huawei phones can run better. No more worrying about being choked by Qualcomm. This is really great.